So welcome everybody to the MIA Alumni Roundtable, our first one of fall 2022. My name is Samantha Bruno. I am the Interim Assistant Director of Graduate Career Services here at the Mark School. I'm so excited to have you all and to have our three wonderful alumni come speak with us today. I'm joined here with Professor Carla Robbins, the Director of the MIA program. She's currently in the car with her pup, the mascot of the MIA program. Wonderful. And I'm also joined with Suzanne Grossman, the Deputy Director of Career Services and Alumni Relations, who will also say a few words before we begin.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're excited to have you here today, and we're excited to kick off the Alumni Relations LinkedIn group, because I know there's been an interest in that, and we really want to build community. There's over 100 alumni at this point, maybe approaching even closer to 150, something like that, right? Oh, Carla's like, no, shaking. We'll get the number, but in any event, there's enough alumni at this point. There's current students in the program, and we really want to encourage community building. So I'll be putting in the chat. Sam and I literally started it this morning. I think there's 10 people already, so we're pretty excited about that. And there were a variety of alumni who wanted to be here as additional guests. And I'm going to just put their links in the chat. It's a really busy time of year. So we'll try to do a version of this event again, so you can get to know each other and some more networking opportunities. But I just want you to, for the students especially, to understand who else is in the alumni community who wanted to be here but couldn't make it today. And I'm going to turn it back over to Sam.
Yes, thank you so much. So, we'll start with introductions. So without further ado, I'll start with Sara Hoenes. Sara, could you please introduce yourself to our crowd here? We're all MIA here, or you're all MIA here. So tell us a little about your MIA concentration and where you're currently at right now.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Sara Hoenes, and I graduated in May of 2020. My concentration was specialty in international development and governance. I also did the Washington semester, and I studied abroad at CNSPO, and I did a migration program in Athens. And I hope those are opportunities that people are still getting at Baruch. I know kind of study abroad is coming back. And I am currently at Accountability Lab, which is a civil society organization, nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. It's actually where I did my fellowship during the D.C. semester, and I'm the manager of global programs and partnerships.
Great, thank you so much. And also a huge shout out to Sara. She was in the first class of the MIA program when the program started in 2017. So huge congrats, that's a huge accomplishment there. Second, I'll invite Jessie to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I am Jessie Bennett. I graduated from the MIA program in May of 2021 with a concentration in international non-governmental organizations. I am currently working at Church World Service, which is one of the 9 refugee resettlement national agencies in the US. I'm the Senior Learning and Development Specialist there. And while I was in the program at Baruch, I did some internships with the International Rescue Committee. I worked with Asylum Connect. I worked with a few professors on their research projects as well.
Great. And last but not least, Erik.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erik Markewich. I graduated in December of 2021. I focused on trade policy and global economic governance. Like Sara, I also did the Washington semester. It was a great opportunity, and I encourage you all to do that. I was not able to study abroad just because of COVID restrictions and all that, which is kind of a bummer, but I encourage all of you to do that as well, if you have the opportunity and ability to do so. While at Baruch, I interned at the Center for Civilians in Conflicts. And at the moment, I am about to start working for the Defense Threat Reduction Agency down in DC, focused on WMDs and what have you. I'd tell you more, but then I'd have to kill you. I really know.
Well, also big accomplishment that you are a presidential management fellow for the class of 2022.
Oh, yeah, that. I was fortunate enough to be selected for the Presidential Management Fellowship, which was pretty neat, and it's a really great opportunity. And again, I encourage you all to apply for that. I think it's still open for another few days, so have at you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, anyone who is interested in applying, or perhaps if you're not eligible just yet because you're not graduating soon, start thinking about the program. It's absolutely a wonderful opportunity that Erik and several other of our Marks alumni have gone on to. Okay, so just to kick off some of the questions that we had, thanks again to everyone who submitted such great questions on the RSVP form. But I'll let whoever wants to take this on first. So since graduating with the MIA degree, how have your career goals changed? And perhaps, you may want to reflect on any shifts you had academically or professionally since the pandemic. Erik and Jesse, I know you both finished. Actually, all three of you had technically finished when we had all gone remote from the pandemic too. Yeah.
I'm happy to jump in. Since I graduated first, I felt very lucky to get a job as soon as I graduated with Save the Children. I was working in their international education department, education and child protection, and was an award manager, which basically was a grant management position. And it's an incredible organization, and they do really amazing work. And I had this idea of working for a big organization like Save the Children, and it was really incredible. And they're doing some kind of reorganization to put more of the work in the country offices, which I think is great. And what I discovered while I was working there is that kind of organization was very siloed. And so I only had the opportunity to work on grant management. And so I knew I wanted to stay and learn the grant management side of things, but I also discovered that I wanted to kind of learn and dip my toe into some other things. And Carla was part of the process where I thought I would apply for an internship on Capitol Hill with my home state senator. And I ended up getting a full-time position as a Capitol Hill staffer. And so I did that for a year to kind of learn the policy process. And then, of course, when you're here in DC, you're connected to all the people that you have met along the way during your studies and other professional work. And so Accountability Lab is where I did my fellowship, and they offered me a position to come back in a more senior level position as a manager of their global programs. And so I'm actually, the work that I did both at Save the Children and with On the Hill is super useful to this role, because I'm doing a bit of the financial grant management side, but I'm also working with the State Department on like a pilot project to do tech for good events in several areas. So Africa is one we're currently working on. We're doing one in Southeast Asia, and then we'll also do one in Central America. So kind of went from more of an interest in working in education and migration to now working in like anti-corruption and tech for good. So I had a pretty big shift along the way.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing, Sara. And you're actually jumping a little to the next question. I'll kind of bring it back. You mentioned about being siloed at work. And I think no matter what industry you go into, it's very common to kind of think of, oh, how do I make sure that I'm not only doing this one thing, and I think a big concern that I think some people have, especially when leaving graduate school, because, you're taking a bunch of classes, learning about different skills, touching different topics, how does that translate when you're actually in, the workforce, and, not having the classes to sort of, get you out of those different silos that you experience. So we'll definitely come back to that, but I'll either Jesse or Erik, either of you want to touch on the first question about, your career goals and how they may have shifted since you've finished the program?
I'm happy to go next. I would say coming into the program, I didn't quite know where I was going to end up. I just knew that I wanted to maximize my impact, whatever that looked like. As the program went on, I would say my interests most closely aligned with, I would say, like international humanitarian law and what have you. And to that end, I had determined that after graduating, I was either going to try and work at an NGO focused on that, like Center for Civilians and Conflicts, or go to law school to get a law degree focused on IHL. Of course, then I got the Presidential Management Fellowship, and that's one of those things you really should pursue. And I am doing so. And the opportunity that has been presented to me is something that is also extremely interesting and well within my intellectual wheelhouse, so to speak. I'm really interested in defense policy and what have you, and what I will be working on is well, that, quite frankly. So I would say, at least for the next couple of years, that will be what I am focused on. I'm still extraordinarily interested in IHL, and depending on how the next, depending on how the fellowship goes, I may or may not continue down this path or try to transition. But ultimately, I'm happy with my choice thus far.
Yeah, and if anything, we appreciate how much you're able to share without giving too much detail. But I will say, from meeting with you previously, Eric, I can absolutely see how, you know, what you had written about in your capstone and kind of what we've talked about in your other papers. I can definitely see the direct connections that you're doing with the PMF. And, you know, I can absolutely hear like your other interests coming out, like, oh, where's that going to go next? So we're excited for that. Yeah, absolutely. Jesse.
Yeah. I will say I went into the graduate program knowing that I wanted to work in the refugee space. The path to where I got now was semi-chaotic because of both, you know, the pandemic and then the state of the refugee resettlement system in the US. I picked a time to enter the field that had a super low refugee ceiling, meaning there weren't a lot of arrivals in the US. And I got my internship at the IRC right when the pandemic hit. So I was interning with them while they were transitioning a lot of their services to be virtual, which was very interesting to watch in real time, but also incredibly stressful. But then when I graduated, there also weren't a lot of jobs in refugee resettlement because of the low ceiling as well. And I ended up where I am now because I kept looking and trying to find my way into that system and into that space. So I spent some time at the New York Immigration Coalition, working in operations there before finding the job that I have now when they raised the ceiling and a lot of the RAs got their funding back. So I wanted to end up in the refugee space, and I took a winding way to get there.
Yeah, Jesse, your story is very much something similar. We had an alumni career chat, I think it was past spring, where one of our alums had described her career path as not a ladder, but instead a lattice. And I think that's so much attributes to where you are, especially with the focus issues that you want to work with, and, you know, your perseverance to stay with those issues really does show. So yeah, thank you so much. So for the second question, I'll ask you through all this. So because international careers are diverse across positions, interest areas, industries, what help or resources did you find most useful in navigating your career path? Whether it was Marks, whether it was outside Marks, anything like that. I hope it was Marks.
Guess I'll be the brave one and start again. I think, honestly, the Washington semester is kind of a game changer as far as being exposed to resources for your career. I mean, you're in DC and you're placed at an internship or a fellowship where you get experience, and you're also exposed to like a network of people who are working in the field. DC is starting to come back alive again as far as events, which also include free food for those of you who are Washington semester candidates. So a great way to eat and learn at the same time on a budget. And, you know, there's just so many opportunities here to dive into different areas of international affairs, whether that's, you know, non-proliferation or whether that's climate change. I think that I will say the DC semester is probably the biggest resource for me as far as getting out and just getting into the field, you know, and you're doing coursework at the same time where you're studying relevant issues. So I think that was probably the most useful thing to me as far as getting my foot in the door. And, you know, Dr. Feller is also a great resource because he is very in tune with networking and how to maintain networks in like a very genuine way. I think, you know, it's very rare that you will just get a job from putting out an application, that it is really good to just talk to people and learn, you know, what they do in their role specifically and what you're interested in that way as well is very useful.
Yeah, that's great. Sara, I think you're plugging, you are the greatest plug we've had for the Washington semester. Yeah, agree. That's wonderful.
Well, I almost didn't go. So if I can plug it, it's definitely life-changing for me. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. Either Erik or Jesse. Yeah.
I will say I didn't go to the Washington program, but I think everyone should also do that. I'll say that the biggest help for me in figuring out what I wanted to do and where I wanted to do it was a lot of the professors at the Mark School. I mean, both Professor Casey, Professor Hernandez, they all work have worked in the refugee and the asylum seeker space. And they had a lot of knowledge about, you know, the various paths I could go, whether that be working as an asylum officer, working at a nonprofit, or working with the US government. And they were super helpful in just helping me flesh out, you know, which one of those spaces I wanted to work in. But then in addition to that, I mean, I'll make a plug for the Marks alumni community as well. I worked in the bigger alumni office at Baruch as during my time at Baruch, and there's nothing more helpful than a Marks alum. They're always willing to lend a hand and give some information. So I think there were a few alumni along the way that helped me decide where in the space I wanted to be.
Great plug for alumni relations. Thank you very much. All right, Erik.
I will second the alumni relations angle. Also, Suzanne encouraged me to apply to the PMF, and that really is the reason why I applied to it, and that is certainly a life-changing event for me. And then a pretty friendly network of alumni helped me revise my resume to the point where it was attractive, and I started getting interviews, and Carla was instrumental in stoking my interest in the specific subsect of defense that I am going into, I would say, and I'm pretty happy with where I am winding up. I guess it takes a village, and I don't know. I'm happy. Take advantage of all the resources you have, guys.
Great plug from Mark's Career Services. I couldn't have asked for more. So thank you, all three of you, for sharing. And our last question is, at least the ones that I have for you guys, kind of going back to the siloed and, you know, hearing about your different interests that you had explored. If you had to go in another direction with international affairs, whether it's now or in a couple of years from now, what opportunities would you like to explore?
I guess I'll start this one. I already mentioned it. I had been interested in international humanitarian law. It sort of intersects with defense policy in a lot of ways. I had been looking to try and get into the State Department at the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations. That seemed pretty up my alley. Were I to pursue a different career path, that is probably the direction I would head. You know, of course, the trick is getting hired by the Department of State, but we'll see. I mean, I'm starting my job this coming Monday, and I'm pretty psyched to see where that goes. So I may just stay here instead.
Yes, and well wishes for your new position, I believe, in next week. It starts next week. Yeah. Absolutely. Maybe we'll revisit the question 2 years from now.
I'll jump next. I will say that it's been only a year and a half, a little less since I've graduated, and I'm super happy with where I am. But I think, you know, if there were other opportunities and spaces that I would want to explore, my kind of second option or thing that I wanted to do was work in the like government space of refugee resettlement in a good way. Into that way is to work for one of the national resettlement agencies at the nonprofit level as well. But I think that's a really interesting space to be in, that's a little more based in policy than direct services. So a lot of times where I was split was the difference between whether I wanted to work in the direct services space or the policy space. And I think that government policy space would be where I'd like to end up eventually.
Great. Yeah. And of course, this question is without saying like, yeah, you guys are happy at your jobs now, you know, absolutely. Don't worry about that. Lastly, Sara, yeah.
Sure. Well, I discovered through the MA program that I don't lack interest in any area of international relations and even more US domestic policy as well. So I think I can see myself going in a number of directions. It's really an incredible experience to work for an organization that's small in the US because there's a lot of work to do. That being said, it's not a 40-hour-a-week job. And so it is a lot of work, and it's boots on the ground work of like going to the places that you're working in, which is really exciting. But again, it's like a lot of travel, a lot of hours, and not a lot of manpower or funding. So I think if I can see myself going in a different direction in a few years, and I love my job here and I plan to stay for a while, but I think like working for one of the funders like USAID or Gates Foundation, something like working on the funding side would be super interesting. And I think there's something very cool about being able to choose who your boots on the ground are, right? Like who are those organizations who are really doing the good work? Like that's a very cool and different perspective, and being able to give money to the organizations that are doing the best work. I think there's something very cool about that. I loved working on the Hill. It's a very exciting place to work. So I'd love to go back and work in foreign policy at some point. I'm not sure if that will happen. It's also a very young place to work. So, you know, it's a fantastic experience. And just to have that experience of like seeing how things happen in real time, I think is very valuable. So I would recommend anyone that has the opportunity to get their feet wet over there, even if it's just for an internship, definitely take it. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And yes, to the taking on internships and any opportunities you have to learn within your own spaces and whatnot. So yeah, we're always promoting that for students and alum in their professional development. So thank you all. So those are the questions I have, at least. So before we go into the breakout sessions, does anyone want to speak, ask all of our panelists a question at one time? Perhaps put it in the chat, or you know, feel free to raise your hand and we'll unmute you. Like that. Any brave souls? All right. Well, so what I'll do now is I will end this portion of our session recordings, everyone. So again, thank you for everyone who joined for this first part of our session. So I'm just going to stop the recording here.